Hi everyone, it's John Nell here, and I see we've largely got everyone who's joining. We've got 11 of you have joined and we're due 16, so I might just give it just a minute to see who else might join, and then I'll make a start and take you through the presentation. Thanks very much for joining. Okay, everyone. I think I might make a start. Obviously, it's great that you've all joined the presentation this afternoon. Thank you for finding the time to join us. This is, and it's also quite strange not to see you. So I've decided to just stick to the deck and take you through what is a kind of very carefully crafted piece of content briefing. It lasts about an hour and 10 minutes, and it covers everything you need to know by way of an induction into the toolkit. I'm also going to show a short video, which will last about 8 or 9 minutes, which will introduce you to the platform. And you'll be able to see, if you haven't already logged into the Culture Counts platform, what that looks like and what you'll see the first time you go and attempt to make an evaluation. So welcome, it's nice to have you all here. My name's John Nell. I'm Director of Counting What Counts Limited. We were lucky enough to, and we're very delighted to have been chosen to be your partner and Arts Council's partner, working with you over this next little while on the toolkit. I don't know how many of you present representing your organisations actually registered your organisation. Some of you might have done, some of you might not. So when we asked you to sign up to the toolkit, in addition to choosing what type of way you could get engaged, and we'll say a bit more about that later, we also asked you a set of questions. And slider questions and open text questions about what you knew about the toolkit and also what you knew about your own evaluation practice. So I think I'll start with that data. So this is what you told us when you registered. So pretty much, well, all Band 2s and Band 3s have now registered with us, and quite a few Band 1s. And when you signed up, we asked you these 3 questions. And you can see the slider here around how you responded in terms of green is Band 3, orange is Band 2, blue is Band 1. I don't know how you react to that slide when you look at it, but we thought it was fascinating. I thought you were all quite tough on yourself about your ability to evaluate the impact of your work well. None of you were saying that you were right up at the top end of the scale. What was encouraging for us is that you could clearly see the potential value of the Impact and Insight Toolkit for the arts and cultural sector. But it was also clear from your response that you needed to know more about what it was and how it operated. So that was really useful for us in terms of shaping this induction session so we could give you an overall insight into what it is. You also told us these things. So we had some open text questions where we invited you to say, what did you think would be vital to making a success? So again, in terms of you who've logged in today to have a listen, I don't know how many of you directly filled out this survey and you were the ones writing the open text answers, or whether this is new for you. But you can read those bullet points yourself. I'm not going to do that terrible thing of reading out what's already on a slide. But I'd highlight a few things, I think, just at this point that really struck us and very much has shaped how we've been working with Arts Council, getting the toolkit ready for you. One is this useful data, not data for data's sake. Let's be really clear from our point of view at Counting What Counts, partnering you to use the toolkit. Unless using the toolkit gives you meaningful and insightful data that helps you understand the extent to which you're meeting the intentions with your work, and helps you understand the difference you make and how and in what ways you can improve that, then we're not winning. The toolkit isn't doing its job. So part of what we're really excited about partnering with you over this next little while is making sure that you get something insightful and useful out of it, and we'll say more about the methodology today. I think the other thing to highlight here is those first three. It's really clear that basically said, please make this easy, please don't make it time consuming, please try and find ways to support us in ways that are useful and helpful. So that's great to know. We've obviously got plans to how to do all of that, and we're going to take you through both, hopefully, some demonstrations of the methodology and the platform that will reassure you about how and in what way we're going to support you, but also hopefully show that the platform is very intuitive and easy to pick up. I think then in terms of the other things on here, I think we'll say a bit about support and training as well at the bottom. We're also really excited to see that you absolutely got the fact that if this is going to be a success for you and other organisations across the funded portfolio and the cultural sector, it is going to be about collaboration. It is going to be about how you work with each other, how you work with us, because that's what's going to kind of give that sense of buy-in and meaningful participation by NPOs. So as I go through and describe the toolkit and describe the platform, you'll hear a bit from me about ways in which you can share and the ways in which you can get involved. Here's what I'm going to cover then. So in this next sort of hour and 5 minutes before we close up at around 2:45, so it will take about an hour and 5 minutes of my briefing time and your time this afternoon. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this first opening bullet point around the principles and methodology of the Impact and Insight Toolkit. Obviously, I don't know how much of, because I can't see you, it's very weird not to be able to feed off your energy and engage you in conversation. But the thing that I think is important to get across is that you're signing up to use a very particular methodology, which is a tool to measure your creative intention. So we're going to talk about that, and I think it's important that I spend some time in that, walk you through it. Sian should have emailed you just before you signed on, if you haven't checked your inbox, a case study, a Lakeland Arts case study that I'll also be talking a little bit about, which will talk to you a bit about how the data looks and tell you a bit about how the insight can arrive from you using the toolkit. So a lot of my time is going to be on one, but then I'm going to go through a few other things before we close. One, talk about what it means for you as an MPO, so talk about the respective expectations, particularly on band 2 and 3, and what the expectations are about you getting engaged and involved. I'm going to tell you how you can shape it. We framed a really interesting governance structure, which we think is very open and very transparent. And there's lots of different ways you can shape the Impact Insight Toolkit. Some of you may well have signed up to the strategic development strand or the art form and participatory metric development strand. And I'll say a few words about those. I'm going to say a bit about peer review and AQA, Artistic Quality Assessment, and the Impact and Insight Toolkit. And we're going to be working with you and with Arts Council as our partners about how we can align and get the best out of those processes. And finally, I'm going to close talking about relationship with Audience Finder. So let's crack on. Let's talk about the principles and methodology of the toolkit first. When Arts Council England launched the toolkit in autumn last year, they put a podcast up on the Arts Council website. It's worth you going and having a look at it if you haven't. It featured Darren Henley and Andrew Moeller, Director of Research at Arts Council, but also a number of MPOs that had got engaged in a bit of jargon, if you don't know it, the Quality Metrics National Test. So after this presentation, we will send you some links, if you've not seen them before, to some key reports. In 2015, we were engaged by Arts Council to do a big Quality Metrics National Test pilot, and 150 MPOs signed up to that pilot, and the greater majority of them did 3 evaluations in 6 months, and therefore we learned quite a lot about the process and how to support you. So this podcast that Arts Council put up around the time of the launch had some of the MPOs engaged in that, and I like this quote from Darren very much. You can read it yourself, I won't read it out, but it kind of captures very much where we start from in terms of counting what counts and how we're seeking to support and work with you, which is that, as you're going to hear, the whole point about the toolkit is to help you understand what people think about your work, and it's a tool for measuring that difference you make and the extent to which you're meeting your intentions with the work that you make. We'll talk about Audience Finder later, but I suppose one way to think, you might be thinking and asking yourself, what's different about this? What's different from things I'm already doing? And why should I care, and why should I give my time to the toolkit? If Audience Finder is a tool to really help understand who your audience is, the toolkit is a tool that really helps you understand what they think about your work and the extent to which your objectives are being met through their response and the response of peers. So that quote, I think, about who this is really for, i.e. you, back to that relevant data, that insight about your creative intentions and the extent to which you're making the difference that you want to make in the way you want to, is what the toolkit is about. A bit about aims. I mean, I've touched on the first one. Clearly, the obvious thing to say about the toolkit is this also already drops into a conversation that you're already having with all of your, with the Arts Council, but also particularly with your relationship managers. I chaired Sound MPO for 5 years. My term expired in December last year, so I was the chair of Sound and Music, which is the organisation that supports the national development organisation that supports new music across the country. So I'm very familiar with that process of engaging with Arts Council, about my back slightly stiffening when our RM attended our board meetings. But when that relationship works at its best, and we had a good relationship with our RM, they know you, they know your programme, they know what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to subvert things, where you're trying to innovate. And what the toolkit hopes to do is, by you doing some toolkit evaluations, sharing some reports, which I'll say a bit more about, with your RMs, it should enrich that conversation about the impact of your work and what you're trying to achieve. And then the final thing is very important. It may not be something that I think you may be as aware of. I think the first two things probably are familiar to you. One of the things that we've discovered, so we went around the country over the last 2 or 3 weeks doing briefings with MPOs all across the country, and obviously this is an online version of that briefing, is that we found that this was the thing that MPOs hadn't really picked up very much. So if you think about the toolkit project and us working with you, there's two key elements. One is to support you to do evaluations of events that you want to learn things about and measure the extent to which you're meeting your intentions with that work. But the other thing, that by carrying out toolkit evaluations, you're contributing to a large-scale anonymized data set. So, as you start to do lots of different data collection, what that does will build a large-scale data set, which will help us talk about the impact of publicly funded arts and culture. I think that's hugely important. So I don't know whether that's a surprise to you, but it's a very big part of this project. That data set will also be public-facing. So in other words, that large-scale anonymized data set will be something that we produce. We'll anonymize the data, and you will be able to go and look at it and query it. So we'll be building a query tool on top of it that will allow you to go and search what those patterns, what those interesting findings are across the whole cultural sector and your peers and colleagues that doing work like you. So we think that's super exciting. Which takes us into this slide on the why. So I've talked about that second bullet point there. And also, let's be clear, we're in uncertainty, horrible uncertainty around Brexit at the moment. But one thing that's certain, whatever happens with Brexit, is that public spending rounds and the debates and the need for good arguments about securing the case for support for arts and culture, both for Treasury and other funders, will only increase in terms of the importance of us getting those arguments right. And one of the things that I'm really excited about working with you all on is that I think that one of the things the toolkit will help you and Arts Council and us do is really demonstrate the huge variety and range and value and impact of the work that all of you do with other partners. I think that links into an interesting question around this, also going to give audiences a voice in debates about value. Many of you are already very committed to getting feedback in all kinds of different ways from your partners and your audiences, but this is going to allow us to do that at some scale in a way that I think will have wider benefit. I'm going to talk through this presentation about the next bullet, which is strengthening peer review within the sector. So if one thing that perhaps we think hasn't been that well understood, which is producing that large-scale anonymised public data set and your contribution to that as MPOs, I think the other is that we're going to work with you to build the number and range of peers across the sector and who are going to be involved in having that really fascinating conversation with you about your work, what you do, and your ambitions. And we think that that's exciting, and we'll say more about it. In terms of cross-sector collaboration on data and sector evaluation capability and confidence, clearly we're super committed to working with you in terms of the toolkit and the Culture Counts platform to make evaluation easy, and hopefully to work with you so that you can find ways in which the toolkit can sit alongside what you do already, add lots of value. Maybe it will replace some things, maybe it won't, but I think that's something that we think will increase the overall capability of the sector to do all kinds of different evaluations. But you'll remember those questions that I started with at the beginning, where you responded at registration to say that actually cross-sector collaboration on data is going to be really important to the success of the toolkit. We agree. One of the things you may not know, so it's worth stressing early on in the presentation, is that when you get your login to the Culture Counts platform, as a registered user of the toolkit and accessing the platform, you can share either surveys or data with any other MPO user who's taking part in the toolkit. So, if you didn't know that, one of the things that the toolkit is effectively, it's a network that you control. So if, for example, you've bid for some work and you're working with a number of MPOs in a particular cultural ecology or local area, and you want to do some joint evaluation, you could set up rights of access to your Culture Counts platform to those MPOs, and you determine what they see. So you could say that they could only see the survey. So it may be that when you're building trust with each other, all you show them are the surveys. But if your relationship is quite well established or high trust, you could also be seeing and sharing the data that's coming in from the evaluations that you're working on together or independently. So that's another important why. In terms of that, how is this different from things you're currently doing? What might it offer up for you that you currently don't have? That's something that we think is of great benefit, and will also allow and facilitate with our support some cross-sector collaboration on data collection and analysis. So, done a bit about the why, told you what we think it is overall and what its aims are. Let's dig into what this core methodology is. As I mentioned, the toolkit is very much a well-developed methodology to help you measure the extent to which you're meeting your creative intentions with particular projects and activities. And you can see that opening bullet point. It uses metrics to explore what audiences and peers think about a performance, exhibition or project. So a word about metrics. Don't know whether you like that phrase. We also talk about dimension statements. The key point to get across here is the power of a standardized question. So at the heart of this toolkit methodology is that we've been working with your cultural partners and peers, people who make work for over 6 or 7 years in Australia and the UK, to come up with statements, dimension statements, metrics that capture particular outcomes that you're trying to achieve through your work. The power of a standardized question, of course, is that once you're using some standardized questions, you can, you yourself as the creative team, the self-assessor, can objective set against them, but as importantly, you can then ask audiences and peers to respond to the same types of questions. So what that standardized dimension or metric allows you to do is to compare your objective setting, if you like, against a set of outcomes with how audiences and peers think you've done against those outcomes. So that's very powerful in terms, and we know from all the MPOs we've worked with that it's that triangulation of self, peer and public data across the metrics that gives real insights. And the other thing about the platform is all of that self, peer and audience data is collected in one place in your dashboard in real time, in terms of some basic analysis and stuff that you can look at. So that's also, I think, what's different about how this might be different from things you currently doing or using. So the other important point about standardized metrics as well, of course, is that you've signed up to use the toolkit, so you're going to be doing evaluations over this next 2 or 3 or 4 years. Of course, by having some selection of standardized metrics in a lot of the evaluations you do, it's going to give you the ability to compare over time different events that you do program by program over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. So that encouragement for you to use particular metric statements gives you that ability to do some longitudinal comparison across different types and pieces of work, or perhaps a piece of work that you that is in very much part of your program is something that you do variations of year on year, and you're experimenting with how to change it, and you can compare those results. So as you've heard, think outcomes. What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve with a piece of work? You look in the toolkit for some metrics to see, and metric statements to see how you can help capture those outcomes. And at the heart of this methodology is you saying, well, given what we want to achieve, let's compare audience and peer responses with our own objectives. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. The other thing is that you're going to see in a little while is I'm going to show you a video of the platform. I've mentioned that the data is collected in real time. A couple of other things to stress in case this isn't something you know. You'll see the video in a minute, but Culture Counts is effectively a survey builder platform. For those of you that are very familiar with SurveyMonkey or other platforms like that, it's got what you'd expect. The ability for you to make any custom question in the dashboard, and it's got survey logic so you can route people through different answers. I think, therefore, you may or may not know this, but just to clarify this, because this came up in the NPO briefings, it's not on a meter. You can ask as many questions as you want. You can also do as many evaluations as you want. Now you're a registered user of the toolkit. So we'll say a bit more in a little while about the fact that Band 2 and Band 3 NPOs have to do 4 mandatory evaluations a year for Arts Council. But if this hasn't struck you, it's important that you hear that you could do as many evaluations as you like. You know, maybe you're the artistic director in a theatre and you're just running a scratch night, and you just want to try something out in front of 15 people, and all you want to do is a quick public response survey to how they reacted to some of the ideas. Of course, you could do it for that, as you could for a sponsorship evening or a stakeholder night. So, as well as using it in a very systematic way to evaluate an event or an activity and comparing self-peer and public data. So, if that hadn't come across to you, it's important that you understand that it's a free tool for you to use as much as you would wish to. But obviously, if you're Band 2 and Band 3, you have this minimum requirement of identifying 4 events to do a mandatory evaluation and reporting those outcomes to Arts Council. Okay, so let's go a bit, if that makes good sense, let's dig a little bit into this data and this process, this methodology, and talk about what success looks like from our point of view. Remember that those questions we asked you when you registered. We said, what would make it a success? And you said, not data for data's sake. So let me walk you through a little bit more on this methodology and how it will be for you to do toolkit evaluations. This is the endpoint. This is success. We think this is success for you and for us working with you as your partner in terms of using the toolkit. So it's this mechanism, it's this methodology to allow you to measure intention. How far are you meeting your creative intentions in terms of all of this amazing work you produce, which all of you have a very clear understanding of the difference you're trying to make with that work. So that's the endpoint. That has a number of starting points to get there. Obviously, it assumes, and you've signed up for Toolkit, so we can assume this, that NPOs want to better capture that impact, that difference that their work makes. The internal team, so we talk about self-assessors. So if you think of any work, whether that's a traditional show that takes place on the stage in which you're selling tickets to, or it might be a participatory activity where you're working with 4 or 5 schools and you've very carefully identified what that process is trying to produce for the participants. Either way, the creative team thinks self-assessors, we're going to use this frame, self-assessors, that internal team to your NPO and SSO, you, when you're thinking about capturing the impact and evaluating a piece of work, you should be pretty clear about what outcomes you're trying to measure. What's the intention behind that work? What are the outcomes that matter to you that are going to signify that you've met your ambitions and objectives for the difference you want to make? This is where the toolkit comes in. So once you're clear about those objectives, you then go inside in the Culture Counts platform, and you can start to review these existing metric statements, these standardized metrics in the Impact and Insight Toolkit. and start to see which of these seem well suited to you capturing the outcomes that you're trying to achieve with that work. You then use the platform to create surveys using some of those existing metrics, and you can add your own questions. So as I've said, and you'll see this in the video, this is very much around, so if you want to, if this is new to you and you don't have much idea what this toolkit and platform is, you're going to go into the platform. There's going to be a range of metrics for you to review and choose from. And obviously Arts Council have recommended that you use particular metrics for your mandatory evaluations, but of course you could be doing other evaluations in which you've got a completely free choice. So you're going in, looking at the toolkit, thinking about those metrics, and of course you can then use the survey builder to add your own additional questions. A very common pattern we see with all of our users is that they will pick a core, of 5 or 6 questions that they use for a lot of their evaluations, and then depending on the particular event or activity and the outcomes you're trying to achieve, you may add in 1 or 2 or 3 bespoke questions. Obviously, we can give you detailed advice about survey length and those types of considerations. So you've created the survey. It's a URL-based system, so that survey will now have a URL. And then you run the evaluation through the data collection platform and analyze the data. And as I mentioned earlier, what we find with people that use this approach is it's that ability then to compare the outcomes you're trying to measure, that self process where you've identified them and you're thinking, here's what I want to measure, against how do audiences and peers react to the metrics you've captured, and you've self-assessed against those outcomes. So if that's helpful, I hope it is. That's one of the ways to think about the fact that when you're going to do a toolkit evaluation, this is the process you're going to go to. And it's important, I stress a couple of things, I think, that, look, this is a survey method. It's got some really clever metrics in it. It's got a platform that makes this easy for you. But in the end, the extent to which you hit that box at the top, that you get insights that really are valuable to you and allowing you to judge how far that work's having that impact you intended, is the thought you put into steps 1, 2, and 3. It's that clarity with which you've thought about why do I want to evaluate this event? What do I want to learn from it? Am I really clear what I'm trying to achieve from this event? And this, this is a form of an evaluation cycle that you'll all be very comfortable and familiar with because you do it already. But it's important that I say, of course, that the extent to which you generate insights through using the toolkit, the effort and the time is less necessarily in using the platform. The effort and the time comes in that, working out the event, creating that internal group that are in a good position to judge what this event is trying to achieve, and then that group starting to think about the outcomes that you want to measure and how that then gets reflected in a set of metric choices and evaluations. Let's move on. I hope that makes good sense. Let's move on now to some things that, again, might be very familiar to you or not. I mentioned earlier that we did the Quality Metrics National Test in 2015, partly as a result of all the things we learned from that, but also watching the types of metrics that get most regularly selected by cultural users of the system all across England, UK, and Australia and elsewhere. It's clear that some of these metric statements, you've got the concept on that, you've got the dimension on the left, so distinctiveness, and then you've got the dimension or metric statement, which is it was different from things I've experienced before. This is that thing I was saying earlier about having some standardized statements, which then allows you or your self-assessment team, your creative team, to objective set against them, and then to get the peer and public to respond. So as a result of all of that work we've done, as a result of consultation with Arts Council, in terms of your, if you're a Band 2 or Band 3 organisation, in terms of your mandatory evaluations, the 4 a year that you've got to do, Arts Council are recommending that you use these 6 questions. And these are, you'll note at the top of the slide, this is for self, peer, and public. So these are questions that we think are equally well suited for the self-assessment team, that internal creative team, to objective set against, but also then to ask peer and public for their response. And then you obviously triangulate that response across the 3 and where are the differences between self, peer, and public. The system, as you note, that little bullet down the bottom automatically collects and has a number of preloaded age, gender, and postcode questions, which you'll see in the video in a minute. So that's one set of the core metrics. There's then 3 additional questions Arts Council are recommending you use for your mandatory evaluations, which are for self and peer only. You can read these yourself, I won't read them out, but a couple of things to note, I think. You can, of course, one of the great things about working with NPOs is that you break rules all the time. You don't like rules. We can give you guidance and rules, but you'll also do lots of innovation and find ways of using this that we didn't anticipate. That's what's going to be fun working with you and capturing some of that. So when we did the Quality Metrics National Test in 2015, 16, we did say to NPOs in that Quality Metrics National Test, the same advice we're giving you here, that these dimensions, risk, originality, are better for self and peer only. But that didn't mean some of you didn't ask them of your public. So you could say, well, why wouldn't I ask a member of the public whether it was groundbreaking? And of course you could. But like with all survey methods, for that to be a useful set of data, you'd have to be asking that member of the public additional questions about how, about their cultural consumption patterns. How regularly do they come and attend work that you put on or work in your art form? And of course, otherwise, if you just had 200 public responses to that question, that may be interesting, but it's very hard to weight or give any significance to that data if you can't have a way of discriminating, not just demographically, but also some of those cultural consumption patterns. So, for example, we did see some really smart use of that metric for some public response when, of course, if you're a building-based organisation which has a CRM and ticketing database, and you already have a whole set of established segments in your audience or box office, and you've got the permission to contact those individuals, you may want to ask the people that buy a season every year that you do, or indeed, if you've analysed the people in your database that come to every piece of contemporary work that you've put on in the last 3 years, you may want to create a specific survey for them and a specific URL in which you might include that question and send it out to them, and you might not be asking all of your general audience members. So you can see it's worth me just digging into that a little bit, but that's the overall idea, that unless you're doing all of that additional thought about segmenting your audience, these are questions better suited to self and peer only. How does the process work then? So just to kind of really re-emphasize and just elaborate a little bit more on what this will look like. You've heard what the toolkit is. You've heard about these principles of standardized metrics, and you've heard about this the fact that it's a tool to measure your intentions. You're trying to make a difference with something. What kind of difference we're trying to make? This is just to take you step by step. So if imagine after this presentation, you sat down with some of your colleagues and said, well, let's start to think about an evaluation. What would it look like? These are the steps you're going to go through. The first and obvious thing is you've got to think about an event or project to evaluate, and you've got to nominate some self-assessors. So our recommendation, of course, back to relevant and useful data, is that you've got to think about events that are representative of your program, but you've also got to think about events that you think you could really learn something from evaluating, back to that clarity of intention and the aim behind the evaluation. What are we trying to achieve? What could we really learn by evaluating this in this way using the toolkit? And in terms of nominating self-assessors, of course, the self-assessment community will look different depending on the scale of the event or the scale of the activity. So let's give you a few examples. It may well be that, let's say, I gave that example earlier, this isn't a mandatory evaluation for Arts Council. You want to do, I don't know, I'm Tom Morris down at Bristol Old Vic, and all I want to do is a quick scratch night, and I just want a really fast and dirty 6-question survey with the audience that I might be all bespoke questions, but it might have a few additional set metrics, and I just want to do that, and I'm the self-assessor and they're the public. I'm not interested in peer review because all I'm doing is trying out ideas. In that question, a kind of quick, fast evaluation might only have one self-assessor. More likely, if you're doing a kind of mandatory evaluation for Arts Council on a slightly bigger project, it's quite likely you might have more than one, that you might have 2 or 3 self-assessors. A classic example of where we see quite a big self-assessment community would be, let's imagine a mid-scale museum that's planned a major exhibition that lasts for 4 months. Alongside that, there's a whole range of participatory activity. Let's say they're working with 10 schools across the local area, all based around the exhibition. In a situation like that, you could see that the people that know that project well enough to be able to evaluate it would be the curators. It could be your engagement officer. It could be your education team. In other words, there might be a group there of 3 or 4 people that could act as self-assessors. There are, our recommendation is always to have between 1 and 5. I think the key thing to stress is that, of course, imagine you've done an evaluation. You could do a brilliant evaluation with one self-assessor leading it with peer and public results, and then they disseminate that work through the organisation. But we've also seen by working with organisations that one of the things that works really well, of course, is that if you do have that kind of ready-made community of 3 or 4 people who've all been engaged in the self-assessment process, when that peer and public data comes back in and you're trying to compare and contrast, you've got that richness of conversation internally about interpreting the results and interpreting what it means. So step 1, pick an event. What are we trying to achieve with it? Work out who our self-assessors are. That self-assessor group, as that loop we showed you earlier, we choose the questions to evaluate the work. And what we commonly see is you combining some core metrics and some custom questions. At that point, you're going to use the platform to create a pre-event survey with those chosen metrics, and you're going to send that out to your self-assessors. So this is the if you like, the objective setting moment, where we've thought about the work, we know the difference we're trying to make with it. Here's the outcomes we think we're going to try and achieve. Let's do that self-assessment process against the questions we've chosen to capture those outcomes. And you'd score each metric to show what you hope the work would achieve. When you've done it, when you've delivered that event, whether it be a 4-month exhibition, a 5-night run, or a number of participatory workshops, you'd also then send out a post-event survey to self-assessors to record what they think the work achieved in reality. Again, I'm sure this is all very familiar to you. You do this already. You all engage in work, you have lots of planning and pre-production activity, you work out what you're trying to achieve, and then when you've delivered it, you come back together and you reflect on what worked and what didn't. So, what we know from our working with organizations like you already is that you'll be very familiar with this type of methodology. That kind of pre and post learning cycle gives you a lot of insight. There may be things that went in ways that you didn't expect. You may have achieved outcomes that were much better than you realized that you were going to, or vice versa. And of course, that's a really interesting part of the conversation. So that's the self-assessment piece. The next bit of this, of course, is identifying people to act as peer reviewers for your work. Remember this triangulation thing, this self-peer public comparison of response against these outcomes you've picked to capture the intention of something that you're doing. We've got a whole set of advice that we can continue to so I've just got a couple of connectors. I don't know who's trying to connect. Is one of you trying to connect? I'll let you connect, I guess. Connection request. No, I think that's just okay. Sorry about that. Forgive me if you saw that on the screen. So in terms of peer assessment, we'll give you lots of peer guidance and evaluation advice around peers. For those of you who've never done an evaluation of this kind and didn't take part in a quality metrics national test, our broad brush advice around peer reviewers is that they can be experts in your field, and they're people whose views matter to you. Once you've identified those peers who you think are well positioned and whose views that you really respect and you want to hear from about a piece of work, you'd create a post-event survey with the evaluation questions you picked, and you'd email it out to peers to respond. A few kind of words on peers. I think that we've seen all kinds of different patterns of behaviour around peer choice, and you will find your way through this. There will be some pieces of work you do where the only appropriate peer is very much an art form or genre expert, because you just think in terms of the character of the work and what you're trying to achieve, you really need that voice. But there are clearly other types of evaluations where the peer community could be much bigger. So I've already mentioned that, for example, that example of that mid-sized museum running the exhibition for 4 months and having a whole range of education and participatory activity around it. In that situation, if you've engaged with 10 schools for a 4-month period, the lead teachers or art form teachers in those schools might be absolutely appropriate peers for that participatory work that you did with their students and those cohorts. So we can advise you, but one of the things that we're excited about and we expect to see is you guys innovating over the next 2 or 3 years about how you start to play with definition of peers and the right peers to give the right insight. In the Quality Metrics National Test, we also saw quite a lot of you become very interested in using cross-art form peers. So in other words, even if, in inverted commas, you're MPO specialising in theatre as an art form, you may want to get views on your work that are not just narrowly from a theatre practitioner or a theatre peer. So that's the peer process. Finally then, so you picked your event, you've worked out what you're trying to achieve with it, what your intentions are. That self-assessment team have come up with the questions that they've sent to themselves before to evaluate and after to do a post-event evaluation. You've used those same outcomes to get peer feedback. You'd also then create a post-event audience or visitor survey with those evaluation questions. I'm about to show you the platform in a minute so you can see how it looks and how it operates, and this will become clearer. But this is something that you should be very familiar with if you've used other survey builder platforms. As you create a survey in the Culture Counts platform, a toolkit evaluation, it will create a unique URL, and you can create different URLs depending on the data collection options that you pick. So of course, if you've got a CRM system and you've got some segments in it and you've got permission to contact people, you can of course create a public survey or a peer survey as a URL, and you can email it out to those respondents. You can also of course be using tablet-based interviewing, intercept interviewing in your venues with either volunteers or your front of house or visitor services staff. Of course, you could have a fixed display. So one of the things we see in museum and gallery settings quite a lot is where, so we just did a bunch of work with National Gallery of Ireland last year, and we helped them evaluate one of their major exhibitions, the M.L. Nold exhibition in February. And they did a combination where they would have, had some of their visitor services team doing tablet-based interviews, but they also had fixed tablets on fixed displays where staff in the galleries could direct people to say, well, if you'd like to complete a survey, please go over to that tablet, and it's autonomous completion. And of course, depending on the character of the event, you could also be getting a survey onto people's phones. It's QR code enabled, Culture Counts, but there's all kinds of things that you can do there. And that also works very well if you're working in a cohort or participatory way. So back to the Quality Metrics National Test, one of the things that Coney did, they were working with a cohort of young people who they obviously had organised in a social media group, probably WhatsApp. And because they were working with them over a period of weeks and had some high trust with them, they'd produce some really short form surveys, 3 or 4 questions, and they'd just send out that URL via WhatsApp so that they were getting real-time feedback from those participants during that participatory process. So again, in the jargon, I don't know, obviously not had a chance to get you all to introduce yourself today, but depending on your level of, the types of evaluation that you do, the platform is really good for what's, to use the jargon, formative as well as summative evaluation. So in other words, it's really good for process evaluation. So if you are wanting to do some quite short and sharp surveys with small numbers of questions with a cohort you're working at to get feedback on how the process is running and how you might change it, it's great for that, as well as summative, i.e. at event end, at process end, where you might do a more formal evaluation. So I'm now going to show you a video of the platform. So I'm going to go into Quick Player. And what we've done, so by the way, as you can tell, this isn't a sort of training session on the Culture Counts platform. I'm sure you've seen that we've been inviting you to online induction sessions, which are training sessions. Some of you may have attended them already, and you're welcome to attend them in the future. This is more of that overarching, this is more an overarching introduction to everything about the platform. But we wanted to shoot a short video so that if you've never had a look at the platform, you can see exactly what you see when you get your chance to log in. We've also got some play accounts at the moment. If you contact Sean, that you'll be able to immediately go and have a play after this induction session, so that you can see when you first go in, what will you see and what would it mean for you to start to create an evaluation. And we've uploaded the Arts Council's mandatory questions and show you how quickly it could be for you to create a survey. So I'm just going to show that video. It lasts about let me just see if I can work out the tech. It lasts about 8 minutes, and then I'll come back on and we'll carry on with the content.
Hello there, my name is Sian and I'm from Counting What Counts. Today we're just going to show you how the platform itself works and how you can use it to your advantage as part of the Impact Insight Toolkit project. So you will receive an email from either myself or my colleague Simone, which will contain your username and password. All you need to do is to pop them into the allocated boxes on your on the portal page, which you will also receive a link to. So I'm just going to click sign in. Okay, so no thank you. Don't want to say the password right now. Okay, so this is what your dashboard will look like when you arrive into it. If we scroll over onto the left-hand side, you'll see that there is an evaluation template. Now this template is really very useful because it contains everything in it that Arts Council would like you to do as part of the mandatory evaluations for the Impact Insight Toolkit. So what we're going to start off with though is we're going to do your own evaluation. So I'm going to click on new here. Evaluation name. Now we tend to suggest that it is the name of the event you're going to be evaluating, or the project, something that will make it easy for you to navigate later on. And click on create. Lovely, because another one popped over here. Okay, so let's have a look at this template. Now, this template is going to be used by everybody that's involved in the Impact Insight Toolkit. Therefore, we do ask that you do not make any changes to the template itself, because as you can imagine, it will affect it for everybody. So instead, we're going to be using this to copy from, okay? So you can see that there are a few different surveys down here. We've got a pre-event for self-respondents, post for self-compare, and finally, the survey for public respondents. Now, for the purpose of today, we're just going to focus on the public respondent one. So these would be your audience, participants, attendees, essentially. So let's click over here on edit, copy. You can just change the name a bit. I'm going to do that. And you're going to pop it into your own evaluation. So ST event in my situation, copy survey. So as I said, this is very much a copying and pasting job. There we go. So now if I head on back over to my own evaluation, you will see that it has appeared there for us. Okay, so now is when you can sort of start to customize it. I'm just going to click on this. It will take us through to the summary page. We're just going to zip back to configure over here. So here you see you can pop in your survey name. There are starting and close date options. You can pop in a logo. You can write an introduction. There are some type options here which are very useful when you're doing your self and peer surveys. As I said, this is the one for the public, so we won't worry about that just yet. We also enable you to have a few different delivery options, and these work really well depending on your organization's individual situation. Okay, so the online one is really good if you have a ticketing database or you work in CRM. The interviewer one works very well if you are hoping to actually gather responses on site and you have people, volunteers or staff members that are going to be running the intercept interviews. Display is quite similar to the interviewer in the sense that it takes place at the location. However, they are on static tablets, which means they can be completed autonomously. These are quite popular with museums and that sort of environment. And again, you can see we have some advanced options here, which we won't go through today. So I can continue. So this is the bit that's particularly interesting as part of the sort of survey creation process. You will see here that there are questions already in place. Now, as said, this was copied from the template. And this is great because it basically means that this has all been done for you. So anything that you want to add to it is up to you. You're not obliged to add anything. But we would encourage you to have a think about it at least and to maybe have a look at some of the options down here on the left-hand side. These questions are all the ones that Arts Council would like you to use as part of the mandatory evaluation. So you can see here we've got a few different options. So if you wanted to add in a drop-down, multiple choice, any of these, you are very welcome to do so. Something I would just like to focus on for 1 minute are the dimensions. So we'll click on these. Okay, yeah, so dimensions are standardized statements that people rate their agreement level to. So if we click on choose dimension, you'll see that there are some from this cultural experience category that are already being used, and these are the ones that our accounts have selected for you. If you click on here, you will see that there are some extras. So for example, there are some participatory ones, which, needless to say, are useful if you are doing participatory work and that you would evaluate it. And frequently used custom. Now these ones I feel are particularly interesting because these are statements that we have noticed that are used very frequently by users of this system. So if you would like to try these out and let us know how you feel about them, then that would be fantastic. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to just select Insight here. You select dimension. And again, we have some more advanced options that you can utilize if you wish to. Okay. It's really important though that you know that you don't have to do these advanced elements. Okay. You click save and continue. This is the invite page whereby you would invite peer and self-assessors to complete those surveys. As said, this one's the one for the public respondents. And so actually, in this instance, we're just going to click save and continue and move on. Okay, so here we are on the final page. This is the summary page. And you can see here that we've got a breakdown of the different types of questions that have been asked. You have your different links for the different delivery methods. Some people choose to use all three and then they can compare how their audience reacted according to the different delivery methods. Other people might just want to choose one, and that's absolutely fine. We're happy to discuss that with you on a case-by-case basis. Okay. I'm just going to bring your attention over to these icons for 1 minute. So this eye is really helpful because this is the preview button. And that means that you are able to send your survey to any colleagues that you feel it would be appropriate for them to look at the survey and just give it a check over. And it won't record any responses. So that's really helpful. There's also here the copy URL button, and this is what you would click on, unless of course you wanted just to highlight it and then copy it in that way. When you go to pop the URL into, however you're going to distribute it, whether it's via email or social media or whatever you're choosing. But I'm just going to quickly show you how it actually looks for the respondent. So we're going to go on to preview now. It will load. There's going to be a little dialog box just to tell me that this is actually a preview one, so it won't be saving any responses. There you go, you see it's come up here. Now, if this were a live survey, and if I had done this, you would have a logo up the top here. You've got your introduction. Now, I just want you to see how clear it is for the respondent. Okay, so it's very clearly laid out, and all they need to do is to click on the bar to record their response. Okay, and you'll see that the icon down here has changed to green and says next page. As you can see here, if somebody does not click on the bar to record a response, then it will just simply remain orange, which enables them to skip. This is really good because it basically means that if somebody doesn't want to answer a specific question, then that's absolutely fine. They can just keep skip. There we go. We also have a few demographics in there. And then we just reach the end of the page saying, thank you very much for your response. So I hope you found that helpful. We are, of course, going to be providing you with lots more information on how to use the more advanced elements of the platform. But I hope this has given you just a little flavour. Thank you. Hello there, my name is Charlotte.
So that was Sean from our team, who's just taken you through that demo. I hope that's was helpful for those of you that haven't seen the platform before, and also hopefully reassuring that if you've used any type of software before, it's very intuitive. It's like a lot of survey builder platforms. You've seen what I was trying to describe at the beginning of the presentation, that it's got preloaded metrics and dimension statements, and obviously your capacity to create your own bespoke questions. And remember, it's unmetered, so you can make as many surveys as you would wish. There's a couple of things I'd stress, which may be new. We've discovered this going around the country doing the MPO briefings over this last couple of weeks. We discovered that a lot of you didn't realise that we'd built a set of participatory metrics with you and colleagues over that last 3 or 4 years. So if that's a surprise to you, I hope it's a nice surprise. So I mentioned earlier that we're going to send you, once this induction session is finished online, we'll make sure we email you later some links to some key reports. In addition to the Quality Metrics National Test Report, we did a report on the participatory metrics. And that's worth a read. But for those of you that don't like long reports, both of those reports have really great executive summaries at the beginning, so shouldn't take too long for you to work through. Also, just to say on the participatory metrics report, Arts Council England have since commissioned a very good piece of work that was undertaken by Shared Intelligence, amongst others, looking at both the cultural experience metrics and the participatory metrics around their accessibility and legibility for different groups and for young people. And we're going to be working with you and other MPOs about how to look at those and the implications for how we continue to develop and improve all of those measurement instruments. A bit about the custom questions. I think that Sean's right that that's exciting. One of the things that a system like this does is learn from what its users will be doing. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is what type of custom questions you as a set of MPOs start to come up with. And of course, we'll look at the ones that are being made the most and then being picked the most. So of course, as we start to see the custom questions you make, let's say you start making a set of custom questions about cultural experience, we can start to make sure that they're being represented in the drop-down menu, and you can start to scan and pick them. But of course, the ones that get picked the most will start then to be presented at the top of the menu. The other really powerful thing about that dimension box and the custom questions is, I'm going to come on to this in a minute, some of you will have signed up and know that you can join an art form and participatory metrics strand. So what's particularly exciting for us too, being your partner over the next 2 or 3 years, is that from September onwards, we'll be meeting with a bunch of you that have signed up, whether it's theatre or dance and other art forms, so that we'll start to say, well, what might be those 4 or 5 outcomes for that work that you make in your particular specialist area, where you think we need some new outcomes to capture some of those and some new metric statements. So if we think forward to this time in a year's time, what will be exciting is when you go into the platform and you've thought about an event you want to evaluate, you've thought about those outcomes you're trying to achieve, and you're going through that cycle that we showed earlier where you're picking some statements, that not only will there be these metrics that have been long tested and validated by peers and colleagues here and elsewhere, you'll start to have additional drop-down menus in that dimension box from different art forms, which will allow you to have a wider choice of metrics to include. So I hope that's exciting too. The other thing to say on that is that we have worked with lots of different cultural organisations for a long time and different parts of the third sector. And we decided not to launch, but we're going to talk to you very quickly. We could have launched with, for example, a set of arts and health metrics or arts and wellbeing. We've also got metrics that we've developed with different users around community cohesion and social capital. So we expect to know that because a lot of you do an incredibly exciting set of work across your missions and objectives, some of which is about socially embedded practice, some of which might be with a very particular focus on arts and health, that we'll work to make sure that we start to produce some really interesting choices and options for you there around ways you could evaluate those. I mean, so if anyone on this induction session knows their area well, there are some very well validated metric and survey schedules, if you like, in arts and health. For example, the Edinburgh schedule, the Warwick schedule. We decided not to flood you as we start to engage you with this in this next month with the toolkit around lots of different choice, but we'll start to create those choices, and we'll also blog about them and write about them on the portal that you're going to have, where you'll be able to find other advice and guidance. So Final slide for me on the process, the methodology. I hope you've got the, I hope you've really, I hope this sort of, what's become clear is that the toolkit is this, kind of very, very specific methodology to measure intention. What we know by working, and that you can read around these steps from 1 to 8 yourself, I won't read them out. What we know from working with you and other colleagues is that what starts to get powerful as you do evaluations of more than one is not just comparing them, but also starting to see how, for example, did self and peer scores differ? Did peer and public scores differ on any dimension? And then that internal self-assessment community discussing what we can learn from this and how does it help us understand the extent to which we're making the difference we want to make. I got Sian earlier, just before you logged on, to send you a case study. So you may have logged on to this online presentation and not had a chance to open your emails. But we sent you a little case study from Lakeland Arts. It's just a nice way of bringing to life what I've been describing to you this afternoon about this core of the methodology and how it works. Lakeland Arts are a fantastic organisation up in the northwest, up in Cumbria. They took part in the Quality Metrics National Test. And this slide here, if we had time, if we had the time to do a big sort of data workshop, and we'll be doing data workshops with you as you move through the project, what you do is I give you a set of public scores first, and then I give you some self and peer scores. These are the average public scores for 3 exhibitions that Lakeland ran. You can see the 3 colours there, the dark blue, the navy and the purple, which was the Radif collection, The Nuisance of Landscape, and Emily Taylor. Now, the story behind these evaluations, which are captured in the case study that we've sent you, is that actually on all 3 of these evaluations, the self-assessment team at Lakeland, the curatorial community, did some ranking against these metrics they've chosen. You can see the metrics down the bottom here: distinctiveness, relevance, challenge. And actually what happened is that when they got all of the self, peer and public results back for the 3 evaluations, the self and peer scores on all 3 were really closely aligned. In other words, what the curatorial team at Lakeland set out to achieve, their peers largely felt that they had. But on one of the exhibitions, which was the Emily Taylor, the Light Lilac, actually the public scores were a bit off skew. They weren't really meeting the expectations that the self-assessment team had set themselves on and that the peers had endorsed they'd achieved. And of course, it was that difference between the self and peer scores as compared to the public score for the Emily Taylor exhibition that led to a kind of interpretation cycle internally about why that was so. Emily Taylor is a young artist. She's a ceramicist. And it was a very challenging and socially engaged piece of work. But interestingly, they showed it at, Lakeland chose to show it at Blackwell, which is one of their traditional venues, if you like, a nationally important arts and craft house. And as they started to interpret the results, what it really made them think was that actually they hadn't got the interpretation right. So they hadn't really explained enough about the why of that exhibition, both in terms of its place in Lakeland's programme and why it was important to them. And they also felt that in some respects that their traditional audience coming, or regular audience coming to Blackwell, hadn't expected to see an exhibition of that kind. So there's a couple of great quotes in the case study that you can have a look at. One was that the results are not telling us don't do contemporary art in Blackwell, but rather we need to do something like this again, evaluate it and provide more interpretation about why we're doing work of this kind in this place. And Helen Watson, who was then and still is the Director of Exhibitions and Collections at Lakeland, commented, "The results made us talk a lot about why it was received like it was. For example, we didn't say we support young and emerging artists in the interpretation, even though that's at the heart of what we do." So have a look at the case study. Hopefully that's something that will just bring to life a bit for those of you that are completely new to the toolkit methodology, what's at the heart of this process of measuring your intentions and then how you're trying to make a difference with a piece of work and then comparing self, peer and public results. So that's the first. I told you that I was going to spend the great majority of this presentation on that first agenda item about what are the principles and methodology behind this toolkit approach, and what is it you're going to be doing when you and your colleagues start to pick some events and plan some toolkit evaluation. So I hope that's helped illuminate that clearly. Let's say what it means for you as MPOs before we go into a bit of a debate around how you can shape it into AQA and then audience finder to close this out over the next 15, 20 minutes. Let's talk about what it means for MPOs. I'm sure this is familiar to all of you on this little broadcast, but if not, let's just go through it carefully. As you know, that the requirements and expectations around the toolkit are different for bands 2 and 3 from band 1. So whilst this is a voluntary activity for band 1, band 2 and 3s, as part of your funding agreements, are expected to evaluate at least 4 events or activities a year. In terms of the dates of that, I'm sure you probably know, but just to remind you, the first mandatory evaluation year starts April the 1st this year and will run to the end of March 2020. And then the next evaluation year will start after that. And then there's another one subsequent to it. So they're going to run April 1st to March across those next 3 years. You've heard about the methodology. What you're going to be asked to do is to pick 4 evaluations that you choose to report the results to your Arts Council relationship manager. Now, key thing to signal to you about what's coming and what you're going to be able to input into. We want to make that process of reporting your findings using the toolkit very straightforward. So what I haven't had time to go through today, but please do join one of our online demos. I should have said we do weekly online demos of the platform. You can contact Sean or our support address, which I'll show you at the end, to sign up to them. There's an online demo this week on the 13th of February at 2 p.m. and another one the following Thursday, the 21st at 10 a.m. But look, just check on a rolling basis, because we update them all the time, your ability to sign on to an online demo, which will be much more of an in-depth training session, taking you through the platform. One of the things that online demo will take you through is how the reporting looks inside the dashboard. So that all of this peer, self and public data comes back into the dashboard in real time. You can also download the data in a CSV file. But what we're going to be building, which so that it pretty much automatically pre-populates with a bit of support from us, is a kind of reporting template to your relationship management manager, an insights template, so that that process of sending across your results and you offering additional commentary and interpretation is an easy process for you. And that thing about interpretive context is very, very important to us working with you, which is any set of aggregate scores across the metrics are useful and can be very insightful, but you also need to be providing to anybody internally who's reading it, or a board member, or indeed a relationship manager, some additional commentary about your intentions and other things that may be salient to them understanding how you evaluated that event. So this sense of that wider interpretive context that you give to the data is very important. What else are your expectations if you're band 2 or band 3? You have to nominate at least 1 staff member to act as a peer reviewer. So that isn't, so in other words, the idea there is that over a course of a mandatory evaluation, you and MPO will support 4 pieces of peer review. That doesn't mean that it's the 1 staff member has to do all 4. You could, of course, nominate more than 1 staff member and they each do 1 peer review of another MPO. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's a kind of leadership request being made of band 2s and band 3 here, which is 1, get signed up, get engaged in the toolkit, really help us and help yourselves to do insightful evaluations of your events. But by doing these mandatory evaluations, you're also going to help contribute to this large-scale anonymized data set, which we're going to be able to analyze, and you are too, to look for patterns and interesting findings across that larger data set about the value and range and impact of the work that you are making. And then I think that there's this really interesting collaborative project we're all engaged in, us with you, with the Arts Council, with the Audience Agency, around as you start to deepen insight and do more evaluation, is how can we learn from each other and how can we create that richer data culture across the sector. What does this mean for your relationship managers? Well, I mentioned already, mandatory evaluation starts April the 1st this year through till March 2020. At the end of that period, you're going to send your individual evaluation reports to your RMs. I mentioned earlier, you're very familiar with this process. This should drop into what's already a very well-established and mature conversation you have with them. They already talked to you at length about your work, your program, your ambitions, and they have that kind of 360-degree view of you through your business plan and your funding agreements. If that's 360, this is just a tiny little slice of additional data dropping into that 360, which allows you to and them to have a kind of really good conversation about your intentions and your work and how you're doing. I know from having heard Arts Council talk about this on platforms, they're not with me here today when we did the MPO briefings, that this is very much not about somehow some kind of like crude creation of aggregate scores of which you're going to be judged. They're more interested than anything else about how and in what ways you're using this to improve and evaluate your work and your practices. And I hope it will just drop into what's already quite a rich conversation. By all means, pick up with your RMs if you want further clarity around this. In terms of then how it's going to feed into their formal process with you, the first time your toolkit evaluations that you choose to share with your RMs will feature in any labour flow from them will be, I suppose, when they write their annual letters at the end of June 2020, when they'll be able to engage with you around all of those conversations they've had with you. But again, talk to us, talk to your RMs. They'll be very happy to talk to you about event choice and how to pick work that's representative across your programme and your aspirations. And remember what I said, this is about doing evaluations that are insightful for you. So it's not about just evaluating things that you're already familiar or comfortable with, but things where you think you've got the most to learn. To switch into culture counts training and support, you remember that slide at the beginning in terms of things you asked from us. We've learned a lot about how to support you and other organisations like you over the last 4 or 5 years. The main thing that I'd say about this slide is it's multi-channel and multi-method. So you're busy people. So what's really important is that there are great support documents and videos, that we run regular online and in-person training. So I mentioned already we're running online demos weekly. We're in the process of finishing off a dedicated portal for you where we'll consolidate all of the support documents and videos. And of course, we've got one-to-one advice and guidance. So I've got my staff, Sean, Simone and Natalie and others who you'll meet who are always here to answer the phone between 9 and 5. As we move into the project and you start to do some really interesting evaluation, we can start to support you in a bit more of a tailored way. And of course, once we start looking at the data with you and analysing some of the things you're doing, we'll run a whole bunch of learning and insight webinars, because we know that the thing that you're going to enjoy the most is sharing each other's evaluation experiences and hearing from other organisations and what they've learned. So we'll try and facilitate that process of knowledge and learning exchange. So how can you shape it? I'm sure this is familiar with you, but let's take a quick run through it. When you are invited to join the toolkit and to sign up, we offered you 3 choices. You could either just become a registered user of the toolkit, which would give you a login and you do some evaluations. But there were 2 other ways you could get involved. One was to join the strategic development strand, which we're already in contact with you if you've joined it, because we're about to see you in the opening weeks of March and run some sessions around the country. But also you could join an art form and participatory metric strands, which start later this year. And I've mentioned them already about where we're going to work with you in specific art form groups to develop additional metrics to capture those outcomes. So to give you an example, I know speaking to different MPOs, but an MPO, Dance Umbrella, for example, and Emma Gladstone and people there, that they talk about an outcome for virtuosity, that there's no outcome or metric at the moment to capture the pure virtuosity of performance. You will have lots of views about things that you might want to capture as outcomes very specific to your expertise and activity. One of the things I just highlight here is just how many of you signed up. It was fascinating to see the numbers. And if I'm honest, we didn't expect to see so many of you sign up to both of these development strands. That's very exciting, creates a sort of delivery challenge for us, but it's a delivery challenge we want, because it tells us that you really, really are keen to shape it. And if you are in the strategic development strand, we'll see you in March. We're immediately going to talk to you there about aspects around peer review, access around data analysis and use, event choice. So hopefully see you soon if you're coming to any of those. In addition to those ways to get involved, we've also created a very clear governance structure, which we think is very transparent and will really help us partner with you to improve the whole toolkit process. You can see there are 3 groups here. You can see the purpose and the who. So there's a data insight group, which is all about working out how can we best analyze this data so that we could really understand and increase the value of publicly funded culture. So this is going to be a mixture of Arts Council staff, but also external experts. So no doubt Arts Council will be inviting people from other public bodies. What can we learn from other sectors? And also how can we really ask great inquiry questions of the data? We've then got 2 groups that you can join as MPOs. One, the Diversity and Access group, is this project being run in a way that ensures voices across society are being heard. And an MPO scrutiny group is this project being run in a way that is responsive to the needs and concerns of MPOs. Terms of reference are written for these. They'll be sharing with you those shortly. You'll be able to signal your interest in joining either one. Arts Council will clearly manage that process. Obviously, with the Diversity and Access Group, we'll be looking for MPOs with relevant expertise and no doubt some very well judged external experts. And the Scrutiny Group, we want a real mixture of MPOs. It can't be a fan club group. That should be a tough and unforgiving place for us as your partner where, so for example, we know that for certain MPOs, this is going to be more of a challenge than others, and we're going to have to find ways of coming up with the right response and the right approach. So strategic touring organisations have always historically had trouble in challenges collecting data from receiving houses that they go to, whether they're MPOs or not. But there may be other use cases and types of MPOs in which we need their voices. So it wouldn't just be people for whom this is working well. It needs to be those people who might be finding it slightly harder to make it work for their circumstances and their programs. So that should be a kind of good, honest place to exchange how best to improve the toolkit. So to close out in this last 10 minutes before I leave you at 3, talk a bit about peer review and AQA and the Impact Insight Toolkit, and then say a little bit in closing about the relationship with Audience Finder. In terms of, I mentioned this at the beginning, so you'll remember one of the earlier slides, and by the way, we're very happy to send you this deck as well after today. We talked about one of the big aims as well around the toolkit is not just to create a methodology that helps you measure your intentions at scale in a very clever way and understand what your audiences and peers think about your work, and to create that large-scale anonymized data set, but also to develop a peer database to sort of broaden the number and range of voices involved in peer review across the sector. So you've heard with your mandatory requirements, if you're band 2 and band 3, that you have to nominate yourself. You have to nominate one person as at least one as a peer reviewer if you're band 2 or band 3. But we also want to run the toolkit in a way that anyone can nominate themselves as a peer reviewer. So we're going to be working with you and Arts Council to create a peer database where reviewers can upload their details. You can see the types of information that they might provide. And then, of course, you will be able to search that database to find suitable peers. This is partly about trying to make this process efficient and interesting to you, because clearly when you go on there, you're likely to find peers that you know, but you also might find local peers that you don't know. I mean, the expectation is, if we can build great ecologies of local peers and increase the number, then that will give you more peers to choose from at a local level. And I'm sure I don't need to stress why this is so important to MPOs, but let me just stress it just to make sure that we can be no doubt, which is we think this is an incredibly exciting part of the project. You're part of the funded infrastructure as MPOs, but you know as well as I do that a lot of the incredible work that you produce and the impacts and the difference you make are produced because you work with a whole coterie of independent artists, producers, local experts in your cultural ecology, some of whom, many of whom may not be on your payroll, but maybe people that you regularly work with or you commission. So I think, finding that way to give all of that kind of incredible expertise across the cultural ecology in England that chance to be part of this interesting conversation about the difference you make and about improving all of the work that we all seek to support each other to do, I think is really exciting. So that's the peer database. I mentioned that this was one of the, if you read the strategic development strand slide quickly earlier, notice that peer review was on it. One of the other things we want to work with you in these opening months on is around, we've got the peer schedule, we've got the metrics, all of that works well already. But when we did the Quality Metrics National Test, one of the things that we found when we debriefed peers, which we did, is that one, they enjoyed it, but two, they said, you could have asked me more. There were additional questions I'd have been happy to ask, because once people have made that commitment to attend an event or an activity and give you their opinion, they'd be quite happy to kind of give additional opinion. So we want to find this sweet spot for you and for them, so that one, you get that back to interpretive context. We might ask 2 or 3 additional open text questions, which really help you understand how peers reacted to the metric questions that you used and to give you greater insight, but also to make sure that it's a really useful process with peers. This is part of peers' CPD, continuing professional development. Actually, when you're being asked to be a peer, it's normally a recognition of your relevance or your insight or your expertise. So we think that we can really try and incorporate some of the best elements of what's already there in AQA and really make that a rich process for you and for them. AQA, as I think you know already, but just to re-emphasize it, is continuing. The focus on that is on band 1 MPOs. that aren't using the Impact and Insight Toolkit. My understanding that you should check with your RM is that doesn't mean that if you're band 2 or band 3, you can't request an AQA assessment, but that on the whole, that shift is moving to band 1. And of course, we're already producing and will continue to work with you to produce a whole range of guidance materials for peers. This is a big part of this project, and it's a shift and a change around how can we really support you and as individuals and organisations and others to kind of build a kind of rich context and a rich set of practice around peer review. Okay, my final part of my presentation is about relationship with Audience Finder. When we, so we obviously bid to be your partner and arts councils on the toolkit. All bidders had to outline in their bids the way in which they were going to seek to work with Audience Finder to maximise the synergies and benefits of the two approaches for NPOs. One of the first things, therefore, that I did through the autumn is meet, of course, and we've got regular meetings going on at the moment with our lovely friends at Audience Agency, Dan Torriglani and Simeon and others, to really just talk through and understand the differences between these two offers, their complementarity, and then work out how we're going to progressively over time look at a range of ways in which we can really make this an efficient process for you. I won't read all of these things out. I'm sure you know them already. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that, you know, if Audience Finder is a fantastic tool to tell you who your audience is, the Impact and Insight Toolkit is very much a tool to tell you what peers and audiences think about your work. And reflecting those sorts of different aims and objectives of the two evaluation activities, there's different types of things that come from that in terms of approach and surveying. So whereas with Audience Finder, you're encouraged to do a regular or continual audience survey process, clearly with the Impact and Insight Toolkit, you're just picking those 4 events, mandatory events that you most want to evaluate, where you think the toolkit can give you the most insight. And they might cluster or they may not. They may be spread through the year, or you may choose to spread them throughout the year, depending on your program. So there's not the same expectation with the toolkit around that regular or continual audience survey process. It's clearly different in terms of the expectation of Audience Finder being all NPOs, but obviously toolkit just band 2 and 3. And look, we recognise there are challenges here. We recognise there are challenges around resources to manage and plan the data collection, issues around survey fatigue, which we need to be very attendant to and support you around, and also using 2 different survey systems. Related to those last set of challenges, we're doing a bunch of stuff in terms of working with Audience Agency as our partner and Arts Council to try and minimise some of those challenges and maximise the synergies. One part of that is obviously looking at shared advice and guidance materials. And so that's all about what might be sort of some very practical operational procedures around managing and collecting audience data efficiently and sensibly using the 2 systems. We're looking at how the data from the 2 systems can be pulled and analysed downstream. That's all about planning. So there may be opportunities, for example, with Coventry 2021 City of Culture, and there'll be others where when NPOs are planning, so there you've got Warwick Arts Centre, Belgrave Theatre and others who are using both systems, what might be some of the things we could plan around really augmenting their evaluation approach while they're doing it. And then finally, we're doing what you could describe as, I guess, a sort of classic technical discovery process. I don't know how many of you love software and understand it well, but obviously the Chief Technology Officer of Audience Agency and Audience Finder and our Chief Technology Officer at Culture Counts are working out whether Audience Finder data could be collected through the Culture Counts platform and vice versa, and then what it would mean then to export that data or make use of it in the different platforms. As it says here, it's going to take us a bit of time to work through some of those cost and technical implications, but we're working that through now, and we'll come back to you and report on our progress in a transparent way over the months ahead. The only other thing just to mention, slightly broadening out from Audience Finder there, is that, again, because this is an online broadcast, I can't see you or talk to you, but if you've got some real data nerds in your organisation, so for example, you may have some people that are very used to using what I would call data analysis and visualization tools, whether that's Tableau as an example, or whether that's Microsoft BI, which is another data analysis and visualization tool. Culture Counts has an open API, so that's where we can export data from, and we've built some integrations using those types of tools. So if you've got people in your organization that are very good at manipulating data, very comfortable with using some of those tools, do get in touch with us, because as you start to collect data in the Culture Counts platform and do some toolkit evaluations. If you've got that expertise, we can facilitate that. More broadly, we've got lots of videos and advice and guidance materials about if you're downloading toolkit data into a CSV file, how you can do different types of manipulations of that, from pivot tables to others. So again, look out for resources, get in touch with us and stay in touch. So that's it by way of this formal presentation. Thank you for staying with us through that hour and 25 minutes. It's tough to broadcast. It's even tougher to have to listen to a broadcast. So I hope that was helpful to you and was a good overall introduction to the toolkit. Just to re-emphasize a few messages, there's the emails around our support email. I'm sure you've got Sean Tassel's email, who introduced you and invited you into the session. That's my email address if you want to get in contact directly. If there are questions or thoughts that came to you as a result of listening to this, get in touch and drop them to us. When we did the workshop sessions, the face-to-face sessions with the MPOs, we did an hour-long workshop with your colleagues where we got them to talk about the opportunities they thought the toolkit offered, the challenges and possible solutions, and then key questions they want answered. So if you bear in mind that we did 16 induction sessions around the country, we walked out with a huge array of really brilliant insight and feedback from all of you around those opportunities, challenges, and questions. We've analysed all those, and we're in the context of writing that up into a report that we will share with you, so that you'll be able to see, along with other colleagues, what was identified as opportunities and challenges and possible solutions, and how we're going to be working with you over these coming weeks. The other invaluable material that gave us is that in shaping the strategic development strand meetings that are coming up in March. So again, if you've signed up to those, you should have heard from us. If you haven't, get in touch directly, because those meetings start March 4th. That fantastic set of insights that you gave us in the workshops have given us that opportunity to plan the content around those. But again, if you've got specific points you want to raise after this session around opportunities and challenges, get in touch. But if not, you could wait a few days or a week or so, and you'll start to see a report outcome where we pulled all of that material together. That's it from me. Thanks ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And look forward to supporting you on the toolkit over these coming months. And do get in touch immediately this afternoon if there's anything else you want to ask. Also, of course, as I promised, we'll send you out some links to some key reports that you can download, and we'll also send you out this presentation if you want a copy. Thanks very much, everyone. Nice to see you all. Bye now.